are now going to welcome you to part 2 of Baseline to Baseline episode 10, 10th episode of Baseline to Baseline. If you're just joining us here again, my name is Alister Albert, and I'd like to welcome you to this second part of Baseline to Baseline with Alister Albert. And of course, if you missed the first part, we were talking about the Baseline to Baseline power rankings. So just kind of rewind, use your cursor and send it back. Go backwards, go check out what I was saying in my power rankings table, with teams kind of moving up and down in the rankings, and we're going to see what's going to happen. Where do these rankings take these teams? Who's going to be the new champion this year? So we'll see what happens. But on to this section. This is the section which I think there has been lots of debate about. The most valuable player. There have been players that we need to discuss that are, that have left their mark on the season. And there have been 5 players specifically, I think, who are a cut above the rest and kind of need to be spoken about in this MVP conversation, without any debate. So we have, first up, we have Chris Paul, new guard traded from the Oklahoma City Thunder to the Phoenix Suns. We have Chris Paul, definitely, he's in that conversation. Nikola Jokic, the big man, the center from the Denver Nuggets. Joel Embiid, he had a bit of a difficult year with his injury status and, missing quite a few games, but, he was so dominant and put up some awesome stats, which we'll come to in a little bit. He deserves that consideration. And you'd have guys like LeBron and James Harden who kind of came into the conversation, but they missed too many games, so they're not in this conversation right now. But the next 2 guys we're going to put in is just for their amazing play towards the end of the season. We have Steph Curry, no debate there, I don't think, and Russell Westbrook. Now, these 5 guys, led their teams into these playoff positioning games, the play-in tournament, and, hopefully, especially for Russ and Steph, they could keep their teams in those 7th and 8th seeds, or get into the 7th and 8th seeds. So we'll see what happens. So the MVP discussion, I'd like to start off, excuse me, I think the person who I think, my pick for the NBA MVP for this 2021 season is, drumroll, Chris Paul. Chris Paul. And that's the reason why I have the old Phoenix jersey up at the back there, because the last time anyone from Phoenix was even in the conversation for MVP, it was the coach of the now Brooklyn Nets, Steve Nash. Steve Nash won the last MVP for Phoenix as a point guard again, and Chris Paul has come in and has done a remarkable job with this team. And of course, you have Monty Williams, who should be in the conversation for Coach of the Year as well. But Chris Paul, although his numbers seem very, they're not top class numbers, but his impact of the team and leadership really drove them to the first seed in the West. They are the first team in the West, and they were not even in the playoff conversation the last 5, 6, 10 years. All right, so he averaged 16.4 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, and 8.9 assists, which was 3rd in the league. The last time the Suns made the playoffs was in 2009-2010, last coached by Alvin Gentry. At that time, 2009-2010, they lost to the Los Angeles Lakers 4-2 in the Western Conference Finals. So that's the last baseline that we have for the Phoenix Suns as a playoff team. So let's see what happens with the first place Phoenix Suns, led by Chris Paul, this year. And of course, if you remember those old teams, you had Leandro Barbosa, Dragic, Goran Dragic, who was a young Goran Dragic on that team, Jared Dudley, Nash, of course, Amari Stoudemire, Channing Frye. Sean Marion wasn't there. He was already traded to the Mavericks, apparently. Steve Nash led the league with 11 assists per game. And since that time, since 2009, the Suns have changed 5 coaches. They've had Alvin Gentry, like who we mentioned, who brought that team to the conference finals. Jeff Hornacek, remember him? old Jazz player, and he was let go after a season and a half or 2 seasons or whatever it was. He had a horrible set of seasons. Earl Watson was there for a little while, didn't do too well. He was a bit of a caretaker coach. And then we had Igor Kozkov. Can't pronounce his surname properly, but Igor was there for a season. He didn't do well. And then Monty Williams was brought in, and he's kind of steadied the ship and righted the ship along with Chris Paul. So all of this change has happened. And if you think from the last time the time when Devin Booker was drafted to the Suns in 2015 season, the Suns were positioned at 14th, right? And listen to the rankings for the last 5 years since Devin Booker has been in the league. 14th, 15th, 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 and 10th. Now that's 15th in the West. They were the last team. 14th, 15th, 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 3 times at the worst team in the West. And then last year they were the 10th seed in the bubble season. That's an average of 13.8, like the 14th seed in the West for the whole time Devin Booker has been there. You have Chris Paul inserted into the lineup with basically the same team and Jay Crowder coming from Miami, and they're now the first team in the West. That's a remarkable turnaround, historical turnaround for a team that has just been an afterthought for the last 10 years basically. So for me, you have to kind of bring it to a guy who last year led the Oklahoma City Thunder to a Game 7 first round loss to the Rockets. And that Thunder team, not many people thought they would even make the playoffs as well. And they were a really good first round team. And, you know, he's done it again. He's put himself in a position where I think he deserves to be the MVP of this team. A team that had not been in the playoffs since 2009 and was always ranked close to last in the West are now the first team in the West and potentially the best team in the NBA. Chris Paul to me is my MVP. That's my choice. I don't know who your choice is, but he's mine. You know, based on everything, I know the stats don't jump off the sheet, but you know, he, based on everything that I mentioned here, and Devin Booker being the sole star on that team before, and now we have Chris Paul coming in, he has to be, I suppose, the catalyst for this team moving up in the position that they are right now. So he's my MVP. He's my MVP. Then we have Nikola Jokic. We move on to the Denver Nuggets, Nikola Jokic. And I think, you know, most people expected him to be in a position where he is probably contending for MVP and his team doing as well as they are. Like, of course, in my power rankings, I have them ranked as number 7th of the 20 teams in the play-in postseason picture. And, you know, it's expected. You expected him to do really well again, coming off the Western Conference Finals appearance last year with the Denver Nuggets. And, you know, with Jamal Murray going down, you know, he put the team on his broad shoulders and he pushed. So Nikola Jokic definitely is another front runner in this discussion. He averaged 26.4 points per game. That was good for 12th in the league. 10.8 rebounds, 9th in the league. And 8.3 assists. He was 6th in the league. He played all 72 games, which, you know, is another credit to him. Didn't take any games off, wasn't hurt, very durable for someone who is has a physique that many people kind of laughed at quite a lot. He played all 72 games. He wasn't injured, you know, so that counts for something. And I think, you know, whether or not he wins or Chris Paul wins, I think both of them are very well deserving. My choice is Chris Paul, but if Nikola Jokic wins, you know what? Fair dues, because everything I mentioned there, playing all 72 games, you know, a big man who averages almost a triple-double, you know what, fair dues to him. If he wins it, hats off, but Chris Paul is my choice. So next one, Joel Embiid. You know, he averaged 28.5 points per game, which is 4th in the league, 10.6 rebounds, 10th in the league, 2.8 assists. He played 51 games though. 51 games, and you know, missing 21 games, which would have, you know, it's a lot of games to miss in a season when you're trying to compete for an MVP trophy. And the only reason why he's still in this conversation is because when he had been on the floor, he had been so dominant. Every time you looked at a box score after the Sixers played, Joel Embiid had like 35 plus points and 10 rebounds. 35 and 10, the numbers that we haven't seen for a big man since Shaq, basically. So, he was very dominant, and he got all the respect and accolades of so many people, during this season for being a dominant back to the basket type of big. So that's expected, him being in this conversation. So definitely, you will see what happens to him, but I don't think he should win it with only playing 51 games. I think that kind of penalizes him in my eyes. So he doesn't get it for me. And then you have the next two guys, Russell Westbrook. Now, the next two, Russ and Steph, these are the next two guys we're going to be talking about. Russ. Let's get to Russ. Now, Russell Westbrook had been my favorite player for quite some time. After Kevin Durant left Oklahoma City, I adopted him as my next favorite player. Everyone who knows me, Oklahoma City is my team. They're in a horrible state right now, but Russell Westbrook had been my favorite player. Then he went on the triple-double run. He kind of made me feel happy that, he was on that team. And, he did the best that he could do. But then he got traded to the Houston Rockets. That didn't work out with James Harden. And then when he came to the Wizards, there was just this very disjointed level of play. Some of his basketball IQ moments where, he was taking erratic shots were starting to show again. And, Scott Brooks didn't seem like he could rein him in. And of course, Westbrook wanted the ball in his hands. So you were kind of left to think, well, you wanted the ball in your hands. Your team is now 17-32 up until April 5th. It's probably it's on your back for the team being in that position. So I was in a position at the start of this season where I was starting to think, well, Russ is not going to be my favorite player anymore. I was actually thinking of Luka Doncic as being my favorite player. But Russ has turned my mind around so much with the way he closed out this season. I bought a Russell Westbrook jersey. Should have been up here rather than this old Wizards jersey. But the reason why I have this Wizards jersey is the next significant person who played for the Wizards franchise, apart from John Wall, who was traded for Westbrook to the Rockets, was Michael Jordan. Russell Westbrook in one season almost became the best player on the Wizards in their history. Well, let's not talk about Wes Unseld and the old-timers who are in the Hall of Fame. But, think about, recent history. Russ is probably the best player that the Wizards have had on their books. John Wall had some really amazing seasons, making all-star teams. Bradley Beal has been in, but, he had been injury-prone. We had Antoine Jameson, Gilbert Arenas, Jordan when he was there for the 2 years. With Jerry Stackhouse and Larry Hughes and all those guys. But, Russ has come in and he's supplanted what we understood, who the last best player for, I suppose, the Wizards had been. And again, that's not to discredit John Wall, but, the stats that Russ put up were just crazy. So let's look at them. We had 22.2 points a game. That was good for 24th in the league. Not really great, but for someone who had won a scoring title before, that's still really good. 22.2 points, 11.5 boards. Russell Westbrook is 6th in the league in rebounds. 6th. The next guard on the most rebounds in the season was 21st in the league, and that was Luka Doncic, the next person who was going to be my favorite player, and he was averaging just 8 rebounds a game, right? So Russell Westbrook is in the trees. He was up there. The 5 guys who were above Russ were Clint Capella at 14.3, Rudy Gobert 13.5 rebounds, Valanciunas from Memphis 12.5, Domantas Sabonis, who averaged 12 points a game, 12 rebounds a game, and Nikola Vucevic, who's now with the Chicago Bulls, at 11.7. Then you have Russ at 11.5. Guards are not usually in the top 10 in rebounds. Russell Westbrook was 6th in this league in rebounds. And then, of course, he was first in the league. He has the assist title this year at 11.7. First in the league in assists. Averaged another triple-double. In the last 5 years, Russell Westbrook has averaged a triple-double in the 4 of the last 5 years. And become the all-time leader in triple-doubles with 100 and whatever he's had, 180 something triple-doubles. That's crazy. That's crazy. This is a god, people. A god. Someone who people, when Russell Westbrook was being drafted into the league, people were very uncertain about him being good enough to be a point guard and be a floor general. He has now surpassed Oscar Robertson, 4 times. Outdone Oscar Robertson 4 times, to be a triple-double leader. Most triple-doubles in a month. The most triple-doubles in a season, a couple of seasons ago, where he had 42, and this was a shortened year, 72 games. If he had the extra 10, who knows what these stats would have been. But the most impressive thing and why he's on this MVP list is the Wizards were 17-32 on April 5th. And then Russ went crazy and the team went 17-6 to grab the last seed and to be in the play-in tournament. They were heading for the lottery. Bradley Beal could have just shut it down. Scott Brooks was going to be fired, because that's what I thought was going to happen. Scott Brooks was on the hot seat, and they turned their season around. Bradley Beal joked around with one of the guys, I think, and said, one of the analysts on one of the shows, and said, they started to play defense and that's why they became really good towards the end of the season. But Russell Westbrook is the one who you have to call out for being, the catalyst for why they're in the position that they're in right now. So hats off to him. And then, of course, we have Steph Curry, who, again, another crazy season, 32 points, using the last game of the season to beat Bradley Beal for the scoring title, now averaging 32 points a game. Bradley Beal finished with 31.3 after leading the season for most of the season, being the scoring leader. And then Steph just went on this tear, 49 points in 29 minutes, 11 3-point games, and just doing all the crazy things that Steph does. Steph is a living legend. He should be in the Hall of Fame right now. And, he went Hall of Fame crazy the last couple of games to get the team into the playing position. And, averaging 32 points, like we said, 5.5 rebounds, 5.8 assists, played 63 games. Russ played 65 games. It's crazy what Steph did. I think everyone was just in awe of his shooting, and we've always been in awe of his shooting. He's the best shooter that the league has ever seen, hands down. And he just went berserk, and we'll see what happens in this play-in tournament, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But he is definitely in the MVP conversation. But for me, like I said, the team who hadn't been in the playoffs since 2009-10 and had this dramatic turnaround is the Phoenix Suns. Last MVP on there, Steve Nash. I think CP3 is my MVP. And we have Nikola Jokic, I think, who's going to be a strong second. Embiid, maybe third. Steph fourth. Russ fifth. These are the top 5 in my MVP ranking. So there you have it. And I'll just go straight from that into the playoffs, the play-in positions, where we have Steph and Russ in those play-in games. And of course, we have these brackets which I'll put up on screen, which would be really interesting to see what really plays out. We have the play-in tournament with the Lakers at the 7th seed, the Warriors in the 8th seed. They need to play each other one game. The winner of that game will be the 7th seed and has the right to play the Phoenix Suns, as the 2nd seed, which is going to be interesting. Correction, I think I've said the Suns were the first seed in the West quite a lot in this podcast, in this video, but they were the 2nd seed. But regardless, they did really well, to get to the position that they were in. So the Lakers and the Warriors are playing against each other to try to face the Phoenix Suns. The loser of that game will then face the Grizzlies and the Spurs, who will be the Grizzlies and the Spurs will be playing against each other as a 9th and 10th seed, and the winner of that game will face the loser of Lakers and Warriors for the right to the 8th seed to play the Jazz in the first round. And then you have on the east side the Celtics and the Wizards playing against each other. The winner of that going to become the 7th seed. I personally think the Wizards will get through and be that 7th seed. I don't like what I've seen from the Celtics this year, especially after, well, even whilst Jaylen Brown was playing, after the All-Star break, when that team started to go really uneven and the play started to break down, they were starting to be really disappointing. And I think Russell Westbrook has a momentum right now that will carry this team through to the 7th seed. So that's just what I think. We'll see what happens in the playoff, in the play-in and tournament, and who wins it, but that's my prediction. And then the loser of that match between the Celtics and the Wizards will play the winner of the 9th and 10th seed, which are the Pacers and the Hornets respectively. I think this is going to be a really close matchup, the Hornets and Pacers. I kind of give the slight edge to the Hornets, and maybe that's a little bit biased because I think I just like to see them play. They're just a fun team to watch. But I think LaMelo Ball has done quite a few things which are really interesting. He's a Rookie of the Year candidate who lost a lot of games as well due to injury. But he'll be interesting to see what happens with him and the Hornets against the Pacers with Karis LeVert, who's now healthy after that little kidney tumor scare. Domantas Sabonis and that team who are underhanded as well. They don't have Miles Turner. They don't have TJ Warren. And they don't have Victor Oladipo, who was traded to the Rockets and then to Miami. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the play-in tournament, and of course the playoffs positions. We have the Knicks and the Hawks going to go against each other as the 4th and 5th seed. The 3rd and 6th seed being the Bucks and the Heat. Will be interesting to see what happens there. The 4th and 5th in the West, the Clippers and Mavericks. We'll see what happens there. Nuggets in Portland, 3rd and 6th seed, and as we mentioned for the play-in tournaments, who will face off the 1st and 2nd seeds in both conferences. So that's our little discussion about the play-in tournament. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because that is to come. And once the play-in tournaments are completed, we're going to do another episode of this, episode 11, where we talk about the playoff brackets, make some predictions, and also talk about which players and teams have the most to gain and lose from these playoffs. So this is my little tease for episode 11. Which players have the most to gain from these playoffs, and the players that have the most to lose. So you look at people like LeBron James. If LeBron goes out in the play-in tournament, or he goes out in the first round, double woo. It's gonna be a major hit on his legacy. So there are a lot of players that have a lot to gain in this. So that's just one example of the kind of discussion we're gonna have in episode 11. So that's that for MVP conversation, play-in discussions. The next thing we definitely wanted to talk about to end off this episode is the Hall of Fame. We had the Hall of Fame ceremony, which took place on the 15th of May 2021, and it was, if you got a chance to watch the Hall of Fame ceremonies, which is always an awesome watch, but of course when you have big names like Kevin Garnett and Kobe Bryant, well, of course we know what happened with Kobe, rest in peace. He wasn't around. Michael Jordan presenting Kobe to enter the Hall of Fame. It was it's always an emotional watch. You watch these players, especially players that I grew up with in the 90s, players that we see dominate the game the way that they did, totally hang it up and be enshrined into the Hall of Fame. And let's start off with Tim Duncan. let's start off with Kevin Garnett. Actually, I don't have a Tim Duncan jersey. I'm sorry. We'll just double up 21 as well. But Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett. Sorry, let's start with him. He had the first speech of the notable people, and Kevin Garnett was trying to be funny, try to be tough. Gave a shout out to his mom, gave a shout out to the Celtics, the Brooklyn Nets. He said he couldn't even remember. There's not many people there on the Brooklyn Nets team that are responsible for him being there anymore. But it was really funny whilst he was giving his speech, if anyone watched it, where he was calling out all the different people who he'd like to thank, and he was saying that Paul Pierce. He called out Paul Pierce from the Boston Celtics, and he stopped there. He didn't go into Rondo. He didn't go into Big Baby Davis. He didn't go into any of the guys who are on that 2008 championship team. Didn't call out Doc Rivers as his coach. He just stopped at Paul Pierce, and of course they were the two captains of that team. But he didn't want to call out Ray Allen. He didn't want to call out Rondo, because if there's a big beef between all these guys from the time that Ray Allen left the Celtics and went over to the Miami Heat, asked to be released so he could go to the Miami Heat, which were their main rivals with LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. And they hated Ray Allen from that point on, and they had nothing to do with him. When you hear KG on podcasts, he would be killing Ray Allen, for making that move and calling him a traitor, for leaving the brotherhood in the Celtics and leaving. But he was very classy about it. He didn't call out. He deliberately omitted Ray Allen so he didn't have to go into that bitter conversation. But it was really nice to hear KG, accepting, that being one of the greats, and he deserves it. MVP of the league, a champion, and one of the most fiery guys that you've seen on the court. He said his mother is responsible for that fiery nature. She was also very fiery as well as a person in his family, so he picked that up from him. And then you had Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan was, he had a really lovely speech. Most people always thought of Tim Duncan as boring. He grew out his hair, he has dreadlocks now. He's a totally different looking person. And Tim Duncan has always been just class personified, and he deserved it. In the discussion for the best power forward ever in the league, 5 championships, 2 MVPs, and he and three MVP trophies, Finals MVP trophies, and he talked about his route into basketball, where he was a swimmer on the island of St. Virgin, the U.S. Virgin Islands on St. Croix, and his focus was to be an Olympic swimmer, which his sister was, and then Hurricane Hugo, one of the hurricanes in the Caribbean hurricane season that devastated St. Croix and messed up the swimming pool where he used to train, and he had to turn his focus to basketball. And it was just a really lovely speech. And of course, the last person he wanted to call out for recognition was Greg Popovich, his coach, who he said has been like a father to him his whole career. And it was just a really outstanding, classy speech. And then you get on to the main event, Kobe Bryant, his wife Vanessa speaking on the podium, talking about Kobe and how she missed him. Let in a few details about their relationship and how dedicated he was as a dad, and how his daughters would be so proud to know everything that he accomplished. And anyone who knows me knows I'm not a Kobe Bryant fan. I'd never been a Kobe Bryant fan. Allen Iverson has always been my favorite player in that era, and Kobe I was on the polar opposite to anyone who liked Kobe, because I was not a Kobe fan. I bought a jersey when he died just out of respect, because he meant a lot to the game, and he did so much. He was a role model, and he carried himself exceptionally well outside the game, barring the Colorado incidents, which we will not discuss. But his wife gave an amazing speech, and towards the end my eyes were burning. And I think it probably was like that for quite a few people. It was a very heartfelt speech, and he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And it's just so sad that we couldn't hear from him. Vanessa mentioned, she couldn't call out everyone that maybe he would have wanted to acknowledge for being in the Hall of Fame. But she acquitted herself really well and gave a lovely speech on his behalf, with Michael Jordan standing up right there to support and present him into the Hall of Fame. So it was a lovely ceremony for the 2020 inductees. We had Rudy Tomjanovich as well, who was in there. Tamika Catchings, who was a WNBA champion for the Indiana Fever. Eddie Sutton, and a number of other people. So it was an awesome ceremony. And we have now next year to look forward to. And of course, not to be disrespectful, but the hype and excitement of next year's inductees are not the same. But you have a really good group. You have Chris Bosh, Paul Pierce, Ben Wallace, Chris Webber, Tony Kukoc, which surprised me, but he's not going in on an NBA card. He's going in as an international player, basically, and he had a awesome career for Croatia in Europe. Pardon me if I got that wrong. I think it was Croatia, but one of the European teams, and he was a phenom. And he because of how he played in the Olympics, winning the gold, the silver medal against Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and all of that, when Jerry Krause were looking to get him to the Bulls. If you watch The Last Dance, you saw what that was between Tony Kukoc, Jerry Krause, Michael Jordan, and Scottie Pippen. And Tony Kukoc was going to be brought in, and they didn't like that, and they wanted to teach him a lesson. But he was a European phenom, and he came over to the NBA, and he was a solid role player for the Chicago Bulls, but he was better known most for the Hall of Fame, and that's what he was brought in for, his international career. So yeah, there you have it, the Hall of Fame classes from this year to the 2020 delayed session, where we had KG, Tim, Duncan, and Kobe Bryant, and then you have next year's list of Ben Wallace. Remember that throw and the bell that would go off in the Detroit the Auburn Hills. Palace of Auburn Hills in Detroit. Every time Ben Wallace grabbed a rebound or blocked a shot. Paul Pierce, the truth, as they call him, no longer with ESPN. We saw those videos. Chris Webber, many people debated whether or not he was not first ballot. He had a really good career, but there was a bit of a debate about whether or not he should have been there. And Chris Bosh as well was not a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he made it, and off the strength of winning those titles with the Miami Heat, Chris Bosh is finally in the Hall of Fame, and they will be going in as well with some amazing people. Lauren Jackson, I saw Lauren Jackson in person at the London 2012 Olympics, where I was one of the marshals in the opening ceremony, where the athletes walk into the stadium. And Lauren Jackson, who played for the Seattle Storm and Australian teams, this woman, I think she's 7 feet. She's huge, and she was a huge star in the WNBA as well. And Yolanda Griffith was like the most imposing woman on a WNBA court. Yolanda Griffith, I remember, she was a really strong, imposing player on the women's side of the game. Bill Russell is actually going into the Hall of Fame again, but as a coach, being the first black coach in the NBA. He's going into the Hall of Fame as a coach this time. Jay Wright, who of course is the head coach of the NCAA team for Villanova, and Rick Adelman, the architect of that team in Sacramento, which Chris Webber was on, who that gave the Lakers so much trouble in those early 2000 years with Doug Christie and Vlade Divac and Jason Williams, and Rick Adelman, was a really good coach, coached the Houston Rockets as well. So it's all well deserved. And with that, I like to say it was a well deserved break that we need to end right now. This was a lovely catching up with you guys again on episode 10. We reached double digits on baseline to baseline, and I'm looking forward to doing episode 11, where we kind of discuss what's going to happen in these playoffs. Probably going to have a really lovely guest who's going to be joining us on the next feed, and we're going to be talking about the playoffs, making some predictions, talking about the people who have the most to gain and lose from these playoffs and everything else. So if you haven't liked and subscribed on YouTube and Instagram and followed on Twitter and all those places, go ahead and do that. Go ahead at baseline to baseline UK, not the Actors Post. The Actors Post, go follow that too. But go check out baseline to baseline. Just search it on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and you'll find the pages where you'll be able to listen to all the rest of the podcast and see everything else that I've done. But if you've stayed and watched everything, I'd like to thank you. Thank you very much for following. Like and subscribe. Show it to your friends. Leave some comments. Tell me what you think. And I look forward to talking with you guys again and you viewing, what I have to talk about. So thanks very much. Stay tuned. Episode 11 coming on really soon. This is the busy part of the season for me. This is the time I get a lot more vocal. So you're going to be seeing a lot more of me. So thanks for watching and stay tuned.